Hello, everybody, and this is a recorded contribution for the plenary 6 panel on peace technology in the Anthropocene. So I'm Andrew Collins. I'm a professor of disaster and development at Northumbria University in the United Kingdom. And a great pleasure to have a few moments to share some thoughts with you on the application of peace ecology to disaster risk reduction. So as you might have detected already, I work with this area of disaster risk reduction, and I set up a program way back in 2000 called Disaster Management and Sustainable Development at the university. And this has a sort of international network of itself, and also works with the United Nations and run a lot of different projects in different parts of the world. And we got involved with IPRA, most specifically, I think, with the Sierra Leonean based conference, where we brought into the equation a risk and conflict working group. And this has, through its various iterations, morphed into what is currently now the P Commission, the Peace and Ecology in the Anthropocene Commission. That was launched in Gujarat, the last conference. So I'm pleased to be one of the conveners of that commission. And I suppose what I got to say today relates partly to that as well. So what I want to do with this topic, I don't have lots of slides, by the way. It's just this cover slide and me talking. It's a panel, I understand, so I'll try to be about 10 minutes or so in presenting this. So I see this really that there's an opening for the application of peace ecology to disaster risk reduction. And this has perhaps been apparent for a long time, but we need to think about what does that actually mean. The title of the session, Implying Peace Technology, talks to me of process and application, applied science, but other types of applications as well we might consider in this process. So I want to just talk really about a version of peace technology, I'll call it that is about really finding the calm in the storm through understanding the role of peace in the process of disaster risk reduction and response. In the current context, where the dominant threat to human survival is defined by human actions, that's actually a definition of the Anthropocene, is the current state of the Earth in terms of human actions. It's like a geological strata which is defined by human action and activity rather than nature. But we may ask, what determines human actions in times of crises? What's driving these actions? We need to look at issues of human engagement in critical issues of survivability, governance and inequality, and ultimately to peace through balancing of human and environmental systems. So gaining ongoing disaster risk reduction and sustainable development in the Anthropocene requires science and technology in its broadest scope of available knowledge, behavior change and political will, those three things. Broader scope of available knowledge there is, behavior change and political will as three ways to achieving, if you like, peace in the Anthropocene. Now, I've mentioned being involved in a lot of different research projects, leading research projects, helping with research projects, commissioning research projects in the different roles I've had over the years. And, rather than sort of pick out a project and say this project did X, Y, and Z, I've found myself increasingly looking at a whole collection of different types of projects and saying, what collectively do these say? And in brief, for this moment, I've got three things. Our research on specifically looking at major disasters and trying to understand them, usually in terms of different types of development that cause the disasters in the first place, or the way we try to recover from disasters, and basically understanding disaster risk. Okay, and of course this stretches into conflict risk very specifically as well. I think what we can say we've learnt, are at least three things, perhaps a lot more hopefully, but three things that seem to sum up what some of the big findings are. What crops up time and time again is that people can control ecological and social economic risks, where these risks are well understood. So understanding risk is fundamental, and understanding risk, of course, is priority one now of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction promoted by the United Nations at the global level. But I think for some time we can say through evidence of working with different communities, people, individuals, and institutions in different, completely contrasting contexts sometimes, we find a common principle that indeed, there is evidence that people can control ecological and socio-economic risks where these risks are well understood, simply that. So we need the knowledge. And this is an ongoing process of learning and understanding. Secondly, institutional good governance prevents disasters. So many projects, usually we'll be working at the hard science, we're working at the sort of softer science, or even a sort of deliberately non-science type of approach to some projects. What we tend to always end up with, invariably, is that there is some sort of system of governance which is having a direct impact on disaster risk. So it's safe to say that good governance, whatever we mean by that, that's a long story, but good governance in the best intention of the term means basically we can better prevent disasters. That's the second thing. So political will is linked to that, and then doing it well, doing your politics well, if you like, or doing your governance well, managing well, is very much this second part of the equation. And then a third one, and it goes like this: it's possible to reduce or modify human activities that contribute to environmental disasters and other risks, i.e. people will change. People will change their behavior, they will change what they're doing if they are aware of what's going on and what the implications are and what is to be gained. Okay, so the knowledge, the good governance, and the human behavior make up the ways that we can do this. These findings from multiple projects therefore elaborate on how the means to reducing disaster outcomes occurs through engaging with appropriate sustainable development. And you're probably saying, well, nothing new there. We knew that. But what does it really mean? And what are the opportunities for doing it better? And what is the role of peace in making that happen? Well, first of all, I'd say disaster risk is certainly everybody's business. So whatever you consider your area of expertise or speciality, this is for everyone. It's a global and it's a local concern in an interconnected world. It involves all parts of the world. There's no part of the world I can think of which is outside of this equation. Progress in consciousness and ideologically has been significant in the broader sense. So making some progress in that way, such as in the global agendas for disaster risk reduction and sustainable development promoted by the United Nations. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Conventions on Climate Change, and other aspects of the United Nations 2015 to 2030 that most governments have signed up to variously. So that's, in my view, I don't want to be cynical, we can be, but no, let's be positive and say this is a great achievement. However, and there is a however, the enormous but still achievable challenge is how to implement the accompanying targets that at sufficient magnitude and pace for the benefit of all humankind. So, we may have made some big advances in awareness, consciousness, which spreads right way through into global policy, but we're simply not seeing the implementation, or we're not seeing it at sufficient scale or fast enough. So change in environmental and other disaster occurrences is also a matter of quality of life and livelihood. It needs to be part of people's everyday life if we're going to have sufficient impact. Mortality rates from disasters of the Anthropocene are often reducing due to mass emergency response. Another area of progress is in the emergency response, which has improved in quality over the years in recent decades. But the problem is, whilst many people increasingly may be able to survive slow onset disasters, rapid onset disasters, and crises of various types through fantastic science, innovation, response, better systems, the issue is the quality of future survival is as yet unanswered. What is the world going to look like if we're just keeping people alive, but not with quality of life? So survivability may be getting better in many cases, but quality of life is still lagging behind fundamentally. So a catchphrase I use a lot as I go around is, we really want not just to survive, but to thrive. And that means, an ecologically sound environment and human well-being running alongside each other. So global processes of change are highly interconnected, one with the other, and dependent on peace. Peace with nature, peace with each other. Development and disaster outcomes are interconnected with population parameters, societal transformation and environmental change, be that physical, economic, or political environments, underlain by cultures of peace, reconciliation, trust, and well-being. This fosters hope. And hope is a driver of risk reduction. People engage if there's hope in there being an effect of what you're engaging in. So hope is a driver. Without hope, people will not do anything. So peace and trust and well-being fosters hope, and hope is a driver of risk reduction engagement strategies under conditions of great uncertainty, increasing uncertainty in terms of climate, in terms of environmental biodiversity, in terms of human behavior, and so forth. In the list of global processes of change in the Anthropocene, we can include lots of different things, of course, but to name a few, so you're on track with where I'm coming from here: demographic transitions, emergent young age structures, some regions with demographic aging going on in others. So we've got increasingly young population in some regions and increasingly old population in other regions. Urbanization increasing at exponential rates. Already beyond 50% of world population live in urban areas. Survivability through increased life expectancy versus morbidity. So greater amounts of sickness, though overall people tend to be living longer in most places, not all. Poverty, reduced in some forms, some progress in some areas, but with great inequalities, the greatest inequalities, some would say, that we've ever witnessed in the world today. Misdirected economic growth that leaves unmet basic and extended needs. Basic things like water, sanitation, livelihoods, clean air, quality of life improvements remain unmet, albeit some improvements in some areas on some of those. And then there's climate change, alongside related food security and unsustainable energy supply and demand issues. And of course, planetary pandemic susceptibility, infectious disease. We live in it now. We're doing this now because of the infectious disease crisis we're currently in. COVID-19 is one example. There may be many more for us to learn to live with. Global, but with fundamental ecological origins and interdependencies. So the jury is still out on some aspects of COVID-19, but we already know that environmental disruptions, disrespect for nature, and the way that viruses are able to transmit between different organisms, and the way that human actions and activities have promoted this transmission, for example, through the wildlife trade, are easily avoidable situations, but ones which we continue to do and will promote more and more the risk of pandemic. Okay, so an opportunity exists here, an opportunity by bringing some of these things together under this in this type of audience that I hope are listening to this under IPRA. An opportunity exists to address disaster management, sustainable development, prevention, mitigation, and recovery technologies as prerequisites and outcomes of peace building. For preventing crises, avoiding costly responses once it's too late, enabling disaster risk management across all sectors, enabling a voice for those at risk, stimulating and professionalizing personal, local, and global actions, building back differently with greater human and planetary well-being post-disaster. These are all matters that could be included in the list. Disaster resilience research and engagement is linked to real-world experiences of peace in the Anthropocene. So just a little bit more before I finish. Progress in disaster and development, understanding and action then requires science and technology, political will, and human behavior to reduce anthropogenic-induced hazard and vulnerability and to increase capacity for peace and sustainability, transitioning from vulnerability to well-being by achieving health from biological susceptibility, resilience from mental impairment, and human insecurity from insecurity. Such processes can be framed as peace technologies to make us healthy, safe and free, enable environments that are conserved as biodiverse, sufficiently self-regulating and sustainable, and manage economies that respond to human and environmental needs and quality of life. As such, conflict and other disaster risk reduction ride together. Peace actions are a prerequisite and outcome of conflated conflict and other disaster risk reduction, effective as an integrated underlying energies and aspirations for survivability with well-being. Effective as the integrated underlying energies and aspirations for survivability with well-being. Implications of this formulation of peace and disaster risk reduction include necessary interdisciplinary and multi-sectoral responses to the demands of interconnected social, economic, and environmental systems, and how these together tip into other choices in either racing towards low-level critical thresholds of human suffering or towards high-level thresholds of safe and secure futures. Examples demonstrated the change that is possible. I could talk to the city I'm currently based in, where I work, in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK, and if I look at the differences between 1854 and times of great cholera pandemics and the current situation, there is much greater controllability now than there was then of the situation. So we've built resilience. And of course, it's examples of disaster risk reduction community actions all over the world going on. And we can take our examples from some of these and ask ourselves, how do these create peace and how are they the result of peace? Examples of resilience building similarly. Resilience through sustainable development activities at very local scale. Sometimes very small, but together collectively these amount to something enormous. Examples are numerous and grounded in everyday lives of people. These can be upscaled through framing actions in peace environments that are critical to all instances. So for realizing this knowledge, there's a lot of different things we can do. We can work with the physical science, environmental studies of hazards, for example, the social sciences, social, economic, and cultural studies, policy and development aspects, the management and politics and history and so forth, education, learning and communication and engagement is one way in, health and well-being, people-centered health and well-being, the physical and mental aspects, art, faith and culture, motivation, perceptional, culturally grounded approaches within and without the academy, importantly, locally learnt, realized globally. My end note to finish is that there are some implications of all this for those steering learning and research, as many of you are involved in this group, for promoting peace and ecology in the Anthropocene. So the implications we have in our roles, particularly in education, but more widely. So we need to help create communities of practice that disrupt the status quo, experts and hierarchies leveled in a culture of learning together. And opportunities need to be created for people, particularly youth, to be employed or otherwise engaged in shaping the future for physical, economic, and social environmental quality and safety. Right, I'm slightly over time. Apologies for that. I end here, and I hope this is useful for the panel topic was allocated. All the very best. Feel free to contact me at the email address on this slide, andrew.collins@northumbria.ac.uk, if you've got any questions about this. Very best.